Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit.
Something we've talked about a lot on the Midlife Mentors podcast is the impact of social media and the digital world we live in particular on our relationships. In this episode, we dive deeper as we're joined by Christine Rosen, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the thought-provoking book, The Extinction of Experience. In a world increasingly dominated by digital technology, many of us have become disconnected from direct, meaningful encounters with the natural environment and with each other.
Christine's work delves into how and why this shift has happened and the profound consequences it may have for our well-being, our culture, and even our understanding of ourselves. During our conversation, we explore the roots of this extinction of experience, uncover what it means in practical terms for our day-to-day lives, and consider how we might reclaim a more authentic and engaged way of living. Whether you're a concerned parent or educator, or simply curious about how modern life shapes our worldview, this discussion promises fresh perspectives and hopefully a few solutions to help us reconnect. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. We've got a very exciting guest today. We're so excited to have this conversation. But we were just saying that we'll give a little talk, a little bit of banter at the beginning and talk about what we've been up to. But we haven't actually been up to very much. We've been
heads down working. I've got to say, I know a lot of people when I speak to them have said, this January felt like it lasted forever. I think, over here in the UK, the weather, a lot of people were doing dry January.
The weather.
There were 5 weekends in January. So, but I actually felt it seemed to last a long time, but we achieved a lot. We've been really focused but I suppose that I've been working on my book and getting that out. That's gone to the printers now.
I know. Oh, very exciting. I did join the British Library. That was something I did last week. James was making me jealous that he had this membership to the British Library and was going off and doing sneaky things in the British Library.
I love
So
that.
Actually, I can totally see
I got really excited actually showing you around where to put your stuff in the locker.
It's very cool. Yeah. It's very cool. So now I can sneak off without you now and hide myself away in the British Library. It is cool to be surrounded by all those really, I love books, but just all these really old books and...
The Magna Carta is in there.
Yes.
Somewhere.
Yes. But it was quite funny. I do have to just tell you this. I was sat near James and a couple of girls came and sat next to him. And James isn't very good with people encroaching on his personal space.
It's not the done thing to sit right next to someone at a library table.
You could see out the corner of my eye James's whole body tensing. So I sent him a little message going, do you like that? Do you like that?
Anyway, enough about us. Let's talk about our amazing guest. We're so excited. So I read about this book in one of the Sunday supplements, I think. And we're always talking about the impact of the digital age and social media. And the person we've got on has written an amazing book about it, actually. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Christine Rosen. Now, she is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for Commentary Magazine, senior editor at New Atlantis, and fellow at the University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. Also, journalist, author of multiple books, and author of this book, The Extinction of Experience. Welcome, Christine.
Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, I have too many jobs, like many of us these days.
No, it's amazing. So let's just get straight on into it, shall we? James, as James said, I remember him going, "Oh my goodness, this is an amazing article. We need to get this lady on." But what really like inspired you to write this book, The Extinction of Experience?
So I was I've been studying technology and social media since this will date me, but pre-Facebook, when MySpace was the big platform,
Yeah.
everybody was
Oh,
glomming
MySpace.
onto. Yeah, remember MySpace?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Cheesy
Tom's
graphics.
first friend.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So there was this whole, and I was fascinated by how people were responding to these new platforms and the new ways of interacting. And the New Atlantis, this journal I founded with a bunch of friends, we were studying all this, and so I'd been looking at all this stuff for years and years. But I was raising kids along the way, and I was just noticing that behavior was changing. First, I noticed it in public space, and then I started noticing, like, even in private life, people were interacting in very different ways, often sitting around at home, but all on their phones or all on their laptop computers. And just this was struck me as a pretty significant change. That there were articles and books here and there, but I was reading actually a book or an article by a naturalist named Robert Michael Pyle, and he actually coined the expression "the extinction of experience." And he coined that to describe a phenomenon where he was very concerned about younger generations not getting outdoors, mucking around in nature, and sort of understanding how the ecosystem they inhabited had to be cared for and nurtured. And so, reading that, it struck me that there were a lot of human behaviors that need to be cared for and nurtured and preserved. And we were just sort of tossing them aside in favor of mediated communications without really thinking about what we were losing. And I just started compiling a list of stuff I noticed, from handwriting to interactive behavior on, like, in public transportation. And just, it became a book because I just had too many examples not to sort of sit down and really puzzle through it all.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. There's so much to unpack there. Like, you're just talking about altering human behavior. I thought of kind of two flip sides of the same coin that I've observed. And the first one you marked there, you see people retreating into their phone, right? They're out in a social situation, but actually all of their attention is just in their screen, and they've effectively gone from that room. But the other thing, I read something in the UK press that they think people are just getting more aggressive, generally more antisocial and aggressive. And they think there's a direct correlation between, people saying stuff on social media that you wouldn't say to someone's face, but it's perfectly okay. Of course, it's not okay, but to say these things, and it's now starting to spill over into real life as well.
No, it's true. And if you think about how we spend our time and the sort of habits and behaviors we become used to both experiencing from others and doing ourselves, we spend more than, on average, 7 hours a day staring at some sort of screen. And it's even higher numbers for young people. And that habituates you to behave in certain ways. It makes you want that dopamine fix. You want some new information all the time. It makes you impatient with a lot of things that actually we used to be forced to be patient with, like our fellow human beings in a crowded space, or even just having to wait for things. And so you definitely see, I tracked road rage rates actually in the United States, which have increased precipitously in the last 5 to 10 years. And now we know we have air rage. We have all these new forms of aggressive behavior. And it's not caused directly by technology. I think it's actually caused by human nature interacting with technology at the scale and scope and really at the intimate level that we spend. For many, many people, the phone is the first thing they pick up in the morning and the last thing they touch at night. And that is a transformational thing.
Yeah. It is absolutely terrifying. And would you be able to just kind of briefly explain what you meant in a larger, like, we've explained some of the experiences there, but what did you mean by the definition of the extinction? Because that's a big word. I mean, I'm down with that, but like the extinction of experience, that's a really big thing to say. What were you kind of trying to get across and define by saying that?
So one of the ways I really struggled with how to define experience in the book, because it's a very broad term. It can, people have real, genuine emotional experiences online. Those are real human experiences, but they are mediated. So the more I started studying how we interact with our technologies, the more I realized the thing that is at risk of going extinct are embodied experiences. So the things we have in our physical bodies in physical place with one another, which we used to be able to take for granted because that really was the only option most of the time. But now, as you said, we can be in physical space and take our phones and mentally, and in some ways almost physically, crouch over that device have all these look down experiences, not look up experiences. And we can retreat from the physical world and kind of in a weird way, if you look at some of the stuff Silicon Valley would like us to adopt, retreat from the limits of our physical bodies. And so my argument is we actually need to embrace the limitations of our physical bodies, and we need to understand and be aware of each other in space, in public place versus cyberspace, because we're transmitting all of these human interactions to a mediated platform that, I mean, setting aside the privacy and surveillance issues that have been raised by critics for years, it's changing our expectations for each other at a very basic level. And those little signals, the way we read each other's facial expressions, look, we're able to see each other right now because we're on Zoom, and that's great. But it would be much better to be in person in the same room, because I talk with my hands like a crazy Italian grandma or something. But I'm seeing like the difference between a perplexed expression versus an angry frown. These are subtleties that we start learning at a very young age. If we mediate all of our experiences for most of our lives, we're not learning those tiny little cues that we're hardwired to understand about each other.
I think that's so important. We did quite a bit of corporate work through the pandemic. And something we look at there was Microsoft's research around Teams usage. And one thing they found, like initially there was this kind of like, yeah, this is great. But over time, people tend to withdraw more and more and end up with these like quite siloed small groups that, yeah, it's just quite interesting the way technology has the possibilities to connect, but in some ways makes us less connected, I think.
Yeah, and people turning off their cameras. Apparently that's gone out. Like the people don't want to be seen. And it's absolutely crazy. I don't know whether we're going to come on to this, but one of the experiences that I think you might have said this. I read this the other day and I thought, wow, that's so true. Like we've actually lost the ability to be bored. And like actually when you use the word bored, people are like, oh, well, I don't want to be bored. But actually, those were the moments when we were standing in a queue for something. We didn't have our phone. We would stand there and kind of daydream. Like we've lost the ability to daydream. We've lost the ability to connect with our own emotions or, look up and notice things. And so that ability even to be bored and transform that into a daydream or something like that. I don't know whether that's something that you picked up on as well, that space that's now, that void is now completely filled with our phone.
Yes, this is really important because when you think about how human beings are wired, evolutionarily, we have a very long history, and the most recent technology is just a blip in our own longer human history. The ability to fill interstitial time, those little moments throughout the day that add up to a lot of time, actually, over the course of a week or a month or a year, we can now absolutely fill that. We never really have to be bored. So what does that mean? As you say, it's not just that we can't let our minds wander and maybe have a creative thought or look around and be aware, but also we're not giving our brains a break. Like they need some downtime from the constant stimulation. And I do think a lot of people's general vague sense of dread and anxiety at the end of a day where they've spent all their time filling those moments, that's part of it. I did this experiment on myself during the course of writing this book where I said, I'm very aware of my tech use because I study this stuff. Well, it's complete nonsense because I had to go 24 hours where I didn't pick up my phone during interstitial moments. And boy, was it difficult. It was a real challenge for me. And I'm not on social media. I'm not on a lot of the apps. And it was still a real siren song that I kept turning to throughout the day. So those little moments add up because our habits of mind are formed by every little moment of the day, who we choose to look in the eye versus, send a text message to. And I think that the takeaway I came away from writing this book with was that we now have to actively choose the human in a lot of situations because the default is the mediated. And that's a big, significant cultural and social change.
That's really hit me hard. That we have to choose the human. That's crazy.
Well, it's actually, my next question was about how culture must be accelerating this. So, we've moved, the pandemic kind of moved us from like, even though we had the capability to work at home, like most businesses wanted you in a workplace, right? But now we have hybrid working. Increasingly, we're getting education delivered via a screen rather than in person. That's accelerating it. But we were at a health conference at the end of last year, and they're talking about the lack of nurses coming into healthcare, but with an increasing aging and iller population. And they were openly talking about AI robots looking after people. And I mean, that's just removing human altogether. Are we heading down this fast track towards extinction of experience, do you think?
Yes, and actually, I'm glad you brought up the issue of some of our most vulnerable populations. Who do we tend to experiment on first? The children, elderly, and sick people. You know why? Because they're less likely to push back on new things. And I think that I see this as part of a broader crisis of care and what we understand we owe each other as fellow human beings. So one of the saddest things I have in the book is a story of a man who was in a hospital. He didn't have great health insurance, and they had a telepresence robot on a little wheelie thing with an iPad slapped on top with a real doctor who would interact via the screen with patients. Now, look, if you live in a rural area or you're far from a hospital, that might be your only option. I have no problem with that. But they were using this telepresence technology to inform this man that he had terminal cancer and was going to die. And that is unacceptable, in my opinion. That is not something we should do. I don't think you should be given a woebot, chatbot therapist when what you need is in-person interaction with a human therapist just because you have bad health insurance, for example. So I think a lot of our interactions and mediated behaviors are kind of preparing the groundwork for a world where we think it's an option not to care for others in physical space, particularly as you say, as the population ages. And that concerns me. If you look to the future often happens with technology in Japan. They're already using these sort of robotic pets to keep company, like a little seal that you can pet for older people whose kids don't have time to visit them. That to me is tragedy. That is not improvement. And I think we need to start using these kind of heavily moral weighted terms to talk about this stuff, because this is not acceptable if you want a society where human flourishing is the value, not human efficiency, not productivity. So those are things I think we need to understand as distinct and separate.
Yeah. Wow. That throws up so much for me.
It's like a tumbleweed moment there. I was just thinking, listening to you speak. I think sometimes it can be a bit of an echo chamber between us, and we do talk about it with our clients. But actually, the fact that you've got so much research in this area and you've done so much around it, I'm like, oh, it's actually really nice to know that there's someone else out there that just I can really see and has got their eyes open around like the danger of what we're really doing to the human race. Like, this isn't just something that we can go, oh yeah, it's a bit dangerous. It's actually really impacting the human race.
Well, I think because as a culture, we're driven by this drive for greater efficiency and greater progress, right? So you mentioned there something like the therapy or counseling delivered by chat. And we're seeing like tremendous growth in startups now. And some of them have people at the other end of the chat. Some have AI. But I was talking to you the other day going, I'm not sure if you've got like a serious issue that like WhatsApping someone is really, I get it as an additional thing, like maybe that moment of support, but replacing a face-to-face therapy, it makes me very uneasy.
Well, it's like ChatGPT. You know, ChatGPT. And they're saying, oh, it can know you. It can.
You said you were getting on well with you. Actually, I'm getting on well with him. She said that to me the other day.
Be careful. People have these ChatGPT, boyfriends and girlfriends that are very disruptive.
I know. But actually, I felt myself getting sucked into it. And I was like, Claire, you really need to, again, I hope that I've got enough. It's a bit like you with your phone and keep picking it up and thinking, oh, I've got this covered. Because I have awareness around this and a concern, I hope that I can pull back when it's necessary. But like, some people are using ChatGPT as a therapist. Like there are people using it as friends, as boyfriends. And
well, the rates of people we talk in the U.S. There's been all this discussion of a loneliness epidemic, but I think the loneliness term is actually a little misleading. What we have is an epidemic of self-isolation. People actively choosing to be by themselves, to keep themselves in this sort of bubble where they have constant on-demand entertainment, on-demand food, whatever they want is at their fingertips, and they prefer that because look, we all know you go out into the real world, it's inconvenient, people are rude, the weather's terrible, it's awful, you got to get dressed, you have to like be a responsible adult out in the world, and it's much easier to just stay hidden. And that is a true crisis, because it not only is it will lead, as we know, to rates of, higher rates of anxiety, depression, all kinds of mental health issues. Physically, it's bad for us. It's not good for
Yeah.
our physical health. And a society where that is an ideal is, I think, something that Silicon Valley and tech utopian types want to sell us. And I keep coming back to something that, again, I'm going to sound like the scolding, grandma, but every new thing is not necessarily an improvement. And we have this real inability sometimes when it comes to these powerful new tools that we love, that give us everything we like, and like in the case of ChatGPT, sort of friendships, keep feeding us more of what they already know about us. So it's very narcissistic and self-reinforcing. So of course we love it. It's telling us we're fabulous. Who wouldn't love it? But the but the real world is a whole process of interacting with maybe someone who doesn't think you're fabulous, and maybe some slow person who needs some help crossing the street. Like, this is what makes us human, I think. Not escaping those duties and responsibilities, but actually stepping up and performing them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask is, like, we've talked a lot, I guess, about the consumer facing and the consumer using their technology. But to me, a lot of people aren't applying their critical reasoning to actually who are the stakeholders in technology and what's the agenda they might be pushing. So we're all going, oh yeah, this thing's amazing. It's telling me what, but why is it telling you that? And what's the motive behind it? Do we need to think more about that, do you think?
Absolutely. And actually, this is where, it's interesting. I work at this wonderful research institute. We're very pro free enterprise, pro innovation, all this stuff, which I generally am. There comes a moment, though, where if you're the product, which we all know we are if we use a lot of these tools, and all of your information and data, and by the way, very private, intimate information, to the point of like heart rate, eye movements, certainly your location in your private home, and who you're interacting with based on their phone versus your phone interacting. I mean, all kinds of stuff that people probably don't realize. Setting all that stuff aside, these companies have every incentive to keep us on the device as long as possible, on the platform as long as possible. It is very much like watching people do machine gambling slot machines in Las Vegas in the United States. It's just a kind of glowing, staring at the screen, and they know how our brains work. They have Facebook in its early days went through and hired some of the best behavioral science researchers in the humanities and social sciences in the country at all these academic institutions. I know because I know some of them. And they went there, and their writ was figure out what makes humans stay on the screen and stay on a platform. What do we have to do to keep them coming back for more? So that sort of behavioral conditioning, which again, they're making a product, they're trying to sell something. We have to be much more skeptical now, particularly with regard to children's use of a lot of these things. These were not designed for children. And that's where I become much less let every flower bloom. I become more like, you're creating a product that we know to cause active harm in certain groups, particularly children. So you need to be held responsible for what you've created. You need to have real age limits that are enforced. And as consumers, as adults of this stuff, we need to understand it's not designed with our best intent, our human flourishing in mind. It's for the bottom line of these companies. And if you look, I'll stop ranting because it gets me all wound up.
But
I
love it.
if you look at how these owners, these titans of tech industry, how they raise their own children, they don't let them have any of this stuff.
No.
They're at like Montessori schools with no screens and they're not on social media. So they do not get high on their own supply. That should tell you everything about what they understand to be the power of these tools.
Well, let's be honest as well. They have like thousands of years of normal human evolution. We don't really know yet how putting a screen in front of a baby and then it grows up with it is going to change the development of the brain and the wiring of the neuron.
Exactly right.
Yeah, well, we do know that our attention span, like we can't hold attention on anything. I read that it's, lower than a goldfish now. It's kind of like, oh, it's here. And the amount of people we all do this, and I catch myself doing this sometimes. If I'm watching the TV or something, I might go on my phone as well. I'm like, what are you doing? You're kind of like, your attention's over here. Actually, is that even the best? Netflix, is that the best use of your time? And then at the same time, you're scrolling on a social media platform. It's really crazy. And I think what I wanted to say earlier on, actually, and I wonder what your take is on this. I'm kind of going a bit spiritual here. I hope that's okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, but on a soul level, let's say we have souls, right? On a soul level, for me, I can feel in my soul, and I can't quite explain to anyone, or I wouldn't be able to really explain here like why I know that on a soul level this is deeply, deeply bad. Like it's on a conscience level between good and bad, light and dark. This feels very dark, and I wonder if that's just the age that we're at. We grew up with, there was a whole time of life in the 90s. We always talk about the 90s when they were amazing, the early 2000s, before 2007 hit with the smartphone and Facebook. Maybe it's because of that, but I wonder if on a level, a lot of us know, a deep soul level, that it's bad, but we are so addicted to it. That dopamine hit now, it's like a drug to us now. We're intravenously dripped into it. I just wondered, I was just thinking about that earlier on, and what your thoughts are around on a soul level, whether we can really feel that it's bad for us.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and it was a huge motivation for why I wanted to write this book, because
Okay.
often the debate about our tech use is all done through the framing of an engineer's mindset. It's all quantitative. It's like, if you can't show me the data showing that people don't like this stuff and we know they use it all, then you don't know what you're talking about. You're just a Luddite. You would have banned comic books in the 50s. They say all this sort of stuff. I've been accused of like wanting to bring back smallpox because I don't like the smartphone's impact on us. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But this is what you're describing, and I hear this. I in my research and all the people I interviewed, it's a qualitative thing. And qualitative experiences are not given a lot of resonance in our mainstream debates about our technology use. Even though we all feel it, it's difficult to quantify. It's an unquantifiable experience, but those are deeply valuable too. And that is sort of my message over and over again, is just because you can't turn it into zeros and ones, you cannot turn everything into data, nor should we want every experience turned into data. Tech companies want to turn everything about you into data that can be resold, repackaged, sent back to you in some new form to keep you hooked. Fine, that's what they're up to. But we need to understand that that is not and should not be the full scope of how we understand human experience. Because I agree with you. I talk to a lot of people, and I'm also the hybrid. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a hybrid generation, grew up without it. So some of this, it's like old man, old woman screaming at clouds. Yes, I get it. Get off my lawn. But on the other hand, I now have a greater appreciation for not having the distractions and the attention grabbing things. It's so much harder for young people now to avoid it. They have to actively choose and exercise so much self-discipline at a time when and this is, I think, gets to the soul point. There's some very formative stages of development where you're forming a sense of self. Who are you? What am I? What is my purpose? What is meaning in life? And in those crucial moments, if you're spending more than 7 hours a day on social media platforms staring at a screen, a lot of your sense of self is entirely external to you. Like you have a hard time figuring it out. And I do see this with younger people, the intensity of their inability to have like face-to-face emotional experiences with each other. They actively avoid those. In the workplace, you see it. Like, please send a text. We had someone in our office, lovely young woman, but she said, please don't approach my cubicle without texting me first. And I was like, oh, honey, no, you work in an office. This is what we do. We walk up to each other and have a conversation. But she had real anxiety, and I have a lot of sympathy for her. So those are qualitative things, and we have to really fight for the right to be able to defend those experiences. That I think is really important.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that, because I do sometimes think, like, how do you explain that feeling, that icky feeling? Like, really?
Yeah.
You go and say
it's a legitimate feeling.
It feels really icky and very frightening, and like, I do see. Well, you were saying that there are swathes now of younger people actually also rejecting social media, which I think is really positive. I don't know any of the stats around that. I don't know how many of those are really doing it, but I wonder whether I can feel like there is also a bit of a paradigm shift around social media at the moment, whether it's changed a lot. I know even us running a business, the change in people's behavior on social media has changed and therefore it's changed our business, I'm all for that. I'm like, woohoo, that's great. Let's find new ways of interacting with people now. But yeah, it's I'm hoping that there is a paradigm shift. I'm hoping that there is a bit of a backlash to social media, that people are waking up with the conversations we're having and this amazing book. Hopefully people are waking up thinking, oh yeah, it felt icky to my soul. Like that's, yeah, and there's a reason for that and it's valid.
Yes, and it's interesting because on the one hand, I would say there are, I mean, young people today. I have 18-year-old sons, and they'll be like, "Oh, Facebook's for old people." Boomers ruined Facebook. I was like, "All right, whatever." But they're actually their generation has moved really into weirdly sort of a regression for humanity. Really, it's a very image-based culture, right? Everything's it's the digital fentanyl of TikTok or Instagram Reels, and it's that endless rabbit hole that they go down, which serves them up all kinds of stuff, which they can spend hours looking at, and then you ask them 10 minutes later, what do you remember? And they recall nothing. They recall almost nothing. So that's a sort of strange, again, it's creating habits of mind, and habits of mind are the building blocks of the formation of character and judgment later on. So to the earlier point about like, how do we know what happens when you see these kids in restaurants, right? Plunked down with their families and they all have a screen in front of their face. Everyone's looking at a screen. I'm like, why did you even go out? Like you just, that worries me because we don't know. We're making a huge gamble on human nature with those sorts of tools.
Yeah. Something you talked about towards the end of the book was, and I love the phrase reality privilege. And I guess what we've talked about there is maybe like the soft end of it, if you like, where people, younger people, maybe are spending more time on their phones, so they're missing out on reality because they're on the screen. But I think it was about a year ago, we went to the Van Gogh Immersive, which was incredible. One of the was put on a VR headset, and you were inside Van Gogh's world, and it was amazing. But I was like, well, this even now is quite basic tech compared to what I know is out there. I can foresee the time when someone's life really isn't that great, right? They're living in their squalid basement, eating their takeaways, but they put on their headset and they're in this world where they can be anyone, do anything. And the humanity's gone, right? They're in that world. Their actual real life is terrible, but they feel like fulfilled in this virtual life. And so I really like that term, reality privilege, that those people that can thrive outside that virtual world will be privileged in some way. How do we stop that happening? How do we make sure that people stay grounded in reality when, let's be honest, for a lot of people, I can see how that virtual world may be way more attractive than their reality.
That's what you said. Like people would prefer to do that.
Yes. Oh, and they would. I mean, that is a vision, and the phrase reality privilege, which the tech entrepreneur Mark Andreessen had a whole manifesto, and he basically he made this argument as a positive. He said, most people's reality is terrible. And so instead of trying to fix it, what we should do is give them these amazing platforms where they can live, laugh, love online, and their whole world will be under. Now, there are two conceits to this.
We heard that before. Bread and circuit, I believe.
Bread and circuit.
Yes, exactly.
This is the downfall of Rome.
But he can't. So there are two things he won't acknowledge, though. One, that's actually, they don't have freedom. They are completely tethered to the vision and the world created by the tech entrepreneurs who design and profit from those platforms, whatever they may be. They do not have freedom in the sense that we deeply understand humans' need for freedom. They also physically will deteriorate. And who's advantaged by a population that is inert, obese, and slightly depressed and can only likes to put a set of VR goggles? That is the definition of passivity. It's a kind of soma that Huxley warned about, in the 20th century. And I think that's where I think a lot of concern about the tech companies in the last 10 or 20 years has been more Orwellian, right? It's like, the surveillance state, privacy, and those are all still very important and valid concerns. But Huxley and others like him saw human nature from a different angle. And they said, we're going to want this stuff. So what happens when you raise a population that really wants this stuff and you give it to them? That is not freedom in the way that I think we traditionally understand it. So the Mark Andreessens of the world drive me absolutely bonkers. And I think their vision should be soundly rejected. We have to fight against it because it is the easy path. We have to take the more difficult human path, the one that says we owe each other something. And you know what? Mark Andreessen, he and his friends are buying plots of land outside of San Francisco so they can build their own city and they can live in a very nice reality catered to by human beings. And that's luxury, going to be luxury living fulfilling for a certain class of people. The rest of us are supposed to be satisfied with some sort of virtual version of that. And I soundly reject that. That is inhumane.
So do I, and it gives me absolute shivers, because like when Apple brought out their headset, like I think we went into Apple, and I looked at it and I was like, this is utterly, again, my soul is like just feels it's so wrong, and I'm like, can no one else see this? Is everyone just asleep? Are we all just sleepwalking into this vision of the world where we put on these goggles, and guess where and like you were just saying there, our body will deteriorate? Well, who does that benefit? If our health suffers, if we're more obese, well, let our mind deteriorate. Follow the money. Where does, then we've got pharmaceutical companies trying to keep us alive so we can be on our VR, our headsets more. It's all to do with the money.
And it's interesting because his whole reality privilege world, when Mark Andreessen described it, he's like, well, some people will call this dystopian or science fiction. I'm like, it's a book called Ready Player One. If you've read it, he's described, but that was not a happy world they were describing. It was a world where the human actors had to break out of it and save others from it. So I was like, maybe he needs to read more science fiction. But no, and I think that's, again, it speaks to these unquantifiable things that we know to be true. Our good human instincts. We have good natures and bad natures. We all have both. But I think a lot of these tools have been sold to us as ease, convenience, on demand, pleasurable experiences, but they do bring out the worst in humanity at some level. We've seen the results in our politics in particular, and a bit in our culture. So we now have to do the tougher thing and try to re-encourage, particularly with younger people, habits of mind and values that understand and treat with a healthy skepticism each new tool. Each thing that comes into the world, we have to go, is this good for us? What does it take away? What do we gain and what do we lose? And really look at that balance sheet with a skeptical eye.
I think that's right. That's right. And I'd like to ask, when you were researching all this and writing it, did anything really jump out as practical steps? If people feel stuck right now with their tech, what are the practical steps they could take to bring more experience to their life?
So I say this with a certain amount of privilege myself, in the sense that a lot of people don't have the option of not being tethered to a phone for their jobs. I mean, if you're a gig worker or anyone who's given a company phone and told you have to have this on you at all times and be available. That said, your interstitial time and your inner life is still your own and should be. So I would say, try the 24-hour experiment with the interstitial time. Grayscale your smartphone. Make it unattractive. Good. That's a good thing to do. Track your screen time when you are on the phone during the day, and try not to reach for the phone. And have something else. I mean, I try to always carry a book around because that's what I will try to dive into instead of the phone. All of that said, we have to start actively rejecting some of the efforts by employers in particular to give you a badge that tracks all your movements. Like, employees should ask for more transparency. Same thing with in the private health insurance space here in the United States. Oh, just wear this Apple Watch to track your steps. You'll get a discount. And I'm like, you know what else the Apple Watch can track? A lot of things: heart rate, blood pressure. I mean, all kinds of stuff that an employer has no business nosing around in. And keep this stuff out of your private space as much as possible. I cannot emphasize enough. Get an old-fashioned alarm clock and put your phone outside your bedroom every night. Try it. I mean, I now do that because I was finding that the phone, because it's this Swiss Army knife of life with my alarm and everything on it, it was distracting me. It was calling to me every time I needed to set an alarm. So this all seems very basic, but I think each of those little things add up to an awareness of what we're choosing without realizing we're making a choice, because that's really the crux of a lot of this behavior.
Everything you just said is so true. I actually, I don't know whether I ever shared this on a podcast actually, but in August I went away for 9 days and complete 9 days of no phone.
Oh, that's great. It's like a fast.
I know, but I felt like I really needed it. That's how kind of desperate I felt about this conversation, and what I could see my behavior with that addiction, and that I don't like anything controlling me. So 9 days I took myself away for. I said, right, James, I'm going to phone you on that day and that day, like twice in those 9 days. And my goodness, like for the first 4 or 5 days, I was like a cat on a hot tin roof.
Very twitchy, right?
I was so twitchy and
Yeah.
anxious. And then it was even to the point where I couldn't sleep at night because my brain was trying to almost rewire to this new
Mm-hmm.
way of being. And yeah, so I was like meditating, going for walks, reading books, a bit of prayer. And it was just, yeah, it was, but coming back, it's so easy to slip back into it. It
Mm-hmm.
lasted, the positive effects of that lasted for a while. You know, I was waking up with my own circadian rhythm and all of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
great stuff. But yeah, I got back into it, but I am more aware now. I've done those 9 days. I'm like, oh, you can do it. And you felt amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did. I felt incredible. But so what you're saying there, I think is really amazing to see how you get on for those 24 hours. The grayscale thing was something that I discovered before I went, and it's
Mm-hmm. It's
unbelievable the
great.
difference that makes, isn't it?
Yes, very much
It's
so.
colors and everything. And yeah, even just putting the phone outside the bedroom and getting a good old fashioned alarm like the old days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I went to in the book, I described going to a monastery, which is like such a writerly cliche. It's like, I will go to the monastery and understand ritual. But I love these guys. They were great. This monastery was Thomas Merton's monastery, actually, in Kentucky, rural Kentucky. And it really gave me when I, no tech, you barely spoke, and I did all the prayers. So you're up on this 24-hour cycle of prayer where you're like 2 a.m, you're in a chapel going, why am I here? But you're just listening, you're absorbing it all. I found it. So even when you put the phone down for those stretches of time expands in this lovely
Mhm.
way and slows. And both of those things are things I think most people in daily life crave, is like just a little more slowness, a little more like opportunity where time doesn't seem like we're measuring it by the second now, which we do. And we're not always looking to the clock and kind of conforming to the demands of digital time. We control time more. It does give you more of a sense of control over how you manage your day-to-day life. And that is a beautiful thing. It does, though, take a kind of detox period, as you say. I was
Yeah.
the same way for for 48 hours. I was trying to strike up conversations with all these nice men who had taken vows of silence, and they could see me coming. They're like, oh, like wave my hands at them.
Who is
It's
this
hilarious.
crazy lady? Yeah,
They
I
were so nice.
but I didn't. Yeah, I didn't speak to anyone. Like I was in a Christian retreat center, and so
Mm,
yeah, I was going to morning prayer and evening prayer.
mhm.
But we didn't speak to each other. So I
Yeah.
literally didn't speak. And I'm, as you can tell, I'm like chatty Cathy. And everyone's like, how did you do that? And actually, I thought it was really easy. I mean, in the end, it was really easy for me to kind of just be with it and actually be able to process. One of the things that I came away with was processing a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
So a
You
lot
feel your feelings in those moments. Yeah, you do.
like healing.
You have
And
to
you know,
sit with
like,
them.
oh yeah, you can't run away from them. So I
Yeah.
did a lot of journaling and a lot of
Hmm.
crying and a lot of, release from that stuff where you normally pick up your phone and like, oh, I don't want to feel that.
Right.
My phone. So
Yep.
yeah, it takes a bit of courage and bravery to do that. And I'm not saying it's everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, even just starting with 24 hours.
But especially think about young people who grow up always being able to escape their feelings by having the distraction, like learning how to sit and feel sad or happy, and even being able to identify your emotions. Is this anger? Is it fear?
Yeah.
Is it anxiety? Those are skills, and you learn them by practicing them. And so I think even that, when you take the phone out of the hands of a young person and say, feel your feelings, like that's a radical act these days, and they crave it. They do crave it. They really want to understand who they are, and so I think the phones in some ways distract them from figuring that out.
Yeah, yeah. Christine, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Oh my goodness.
The book's incredible. We'll put a link to the book in the show notes. If people want to learn more about you or about the work you're doing, where can they reach out to you or find out more?
So my main homepage is at the American Enterprise Institute, so www.aei.org. We're a nonprofit. I have an email. Please reach out by email. I try to respond to emails as best I can. But yeah, please, I encourage people to read the book and give me feedback, including disagreement. I've gotten lots of those emails too. It's very helpful to understand what I get right, what I get wrong. So, but I really appreciated the conversation.
Awesome. It's been great speaking to you.
Like
So
I can't express how enjoyable it's been. Thank you so, so much. Could speak to you for ages around this, I can just tell. But I hope you've really enjoyed that, listeners. I'm sure you have. And yeah, Christine, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And don't forget to take the Midlife Reset Audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.